The fluorescent lights of the interrogation room buzzed overhead like trapped insects, casting harsh shadows across Detective Reeves' face as he slid the crime scene photos toward me. Each image, clinical, detached, horrifying, landed with the weight of an accusation. "Look at them, Ms. Morgan," he said, his voice deceptively gentle. "Tell me again where you were on the night of April 17th. My name is Cassandra Morgan, and 3 days ago, I was just an ordinary accounting manager at Westlake Financial. Today, I sat across from a detective who believed I had murdered one of my closest friends." "I've told you repeatedly," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I was home alone. Working on quarterly reports. I ordered takeout at 7:30. The delivery guy can confirm it." For an hour window, Detective Reeves countered, tapping the timeline paper between us. "Leaving you plenty of time to drive to Melissa Bennett's apartment, stab her 17 times, and make it home for your pad thai." The blunt description of Melissa's death made my stomach lurch. We'd been friends since college, shared secrets, celebrated promotions, held each other through breakups. The thought of her final moments, afraid and in pain, brought tears to my eyes. "I didn't kill her," I whispered, the words feeling inadequate against the mountain of circumstantial evidence they'd assembled against me. Detective Reeves leaned forward, his expression almost sympathetic. "Almost. Then explain the argument witnesses overheard between you two at the office. Explain your fingerprints in her apartment. Explain the email she sent to her sister saying she was going to confront you about betraying her trust." I closed my eyes, wishing for the 1,000th time that I could turn back time. Go to Melissa's apartment that night when she'd texted me. Maybe then she'd still be alive. The argument was about a client account, nothing personal. My fingerprints were there because I visited her apartment regularly, we were friends. And I have no idea what she meant by betraying her trust. I never betrayed Melissa. Detective Reeves shook his head, disappointment radiating from him in waves. "We have your hair at the crime scene. We have the neighbor who heard a woman's voice around the estimated time of death. We have your conflicting statements about when you last spoke to the victim." "I misspoke," I insisted. "I was in shock when you first questioned me. I couldn't think straight." "Convenient," he murmured, gathering the photos into a neat stack. "Unfortunately for you, the district attorney finds our evidence quite compelling. You're being charged with first-degree murder, Ms. Morgan." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. My breath caught in my throat as reality crashed down around me. "This is a mistake," I managed, my voice barely audible. "I'm innocent. They all say that." He stood, signaling the end of our interview. "Your attorney is waiting outside. I suggest you start being honest with him, at least." As he opened the door to leave, I called after him, desperation clawing at my chest. "Please," I said. "Someone else did this. Someone else killed Melissa. If you arrest me, they'll get away with it." Detective Reeves paused, regarding me with eyes that had seen too many guilty people plead innocence. "If that's true," he said, "I suggest you figure out who. Because right now, all evidence points to you." The door closed behind him with a definitive click, sealing me inside with the horrifying knowledge that my life as I knew it was over. Unless I could do the impossible. Find a killer while being accused of murder myself. My attorney, James Whitfield, looked like he'd stepped out of a legal drama, silver-streaked hair, expensive suit, and an air of perpetual skepticism. He shuffled papers in the grim visitor's room of the county jail where I'd spent the past week. "The prosecution's case is stronger than I'd hoped," he said without preamble. "They've matched fibers from your jacket to ones found on the victim's body. That's because we hugged goodbye at work that day, I insisted, my voice hoarse from repeating the same defenses. James, please believe me. I didn't do this. He set down his pen, leveling me with a measured gaze. It doesn't matter what I believe, Cassandra. What matters is what a jury will believe. And right now, they'll see a woman with motive, opportunity, and physical evidence connecting her to a violent crime. What motive? I demanded. Melissa was my friend. According to the prosecution, she discovered you were embezzling from client accounts and threatened to report you. The accusation hit like a physical blow. That's absurd. I've never stolen a penny in my life. Nevertheless, they have financial records showing irregular transfers from accounts you managed. Transfers that benefited a shell company they've connected to you. My mind raced. That's impossible. I never set up any shell company. Someone's framing me, for the embezzlement and for Melissa's murder. James sighed, the sound of a man who'd heard fantastic claims before. If someone's framing you, they've done a meticulous job. The company's registration used your mother's maiden name. The account that received the funds was opened with your social security number. Cold fear settled in my stomach. This was far worse than I'd imagined. Someone hadn't just killed Melissa and left evidence pointing to me, they'd been planning this for months, constructing a financial motive that made me look unquestionably guilty. Bail hearing is tomorrow, James continued. Given the severity of the charges, I'm not optimistic. I can't stay in here, I said, panic rising. I need to be out there, finding who really did this. That's not your job. It's the police's job to investigate. The police think they've found their killer. I slapped my palm on the table, frustration boiling over. They're not looking for anyone else. James gathered his papers, his expression softening slightly. Focus on remembering anything unusual in the weeks before Melissa's death. Any new people in her life, any strange behavior. Give me something to work with. After he left, I was escorted back to my cell, a 8x10 concrete box with a metal toilet and a thin mattress that smelled of industrial disinfectant. As the door clanged shut behind me, I sank onto the bed, burying my face in my hands. Think, Cassandra. Think. Melissa and I worked closely together at Westlake. As senior accountants, we handled the firm's most important client portfolios. If someone was embezzling, we would have noticed, unless the person had intimate knowledge of our systems and procedures. Someone inside Westlake. The realization sent a spark of purpose through my despair. I might be trapped in a cell, but my mind was free to work the problem. And right now, finding Melissa's killer was the only way to save myself. I closed my eyes, mentally walking through the Westlake offices, cataloging everyone with access to our financial systems. The list was surprisingly short: myself, Melissa, our department head Robert Klein, and the IT director, Vincent Chen. The company's founder, Warren Westlake, had technical access but hadn't actively managed accounts in years. 5 people. One of them was dead. One of them was me. That left 3 suspects. Somewhere in that small circle was a killer who had methodically framed me for both financial crimes and murder. Someone who knew enough about my life to use my mother's maiden name, my social security number, my routines. Someone who knew I would be home alone, without an alibi, the night they killed Melissa. A chill ran down my spine as connections began forming in my mind. Piece by piece, a terrifying picture emerged. I might know who the killer was. But proving it from behind bars would be impossible. Unless I had one person I could trust. One person who might help me uncover the truth. I needed to get a message to her, and I needed to do it before my bail hearing. Because if the judge denied bail, I would be trapped while a murderer walked free, and potentially tied up loose ends that could lead back to them. Loose ends like me. The bail hearing went as badly as James had predicted. Despite his eloquent arguments about my community ties and lack of prior criminal record, the judge deemed me a flight risk and potential danger to the community. No bail. I would remain in county lockup until trial, a trial that could be months away. As the guards led me back to the holding area, I caught sight of a familiar face in the gallery, Diane Lewis, Westlake's administrative assistant and my closest ally at the company. I'd managed to get a message to her through James, and the relief of seeing her there nearly brought me to tears. Our eyes met briefly, and she gave an almost imperceptible nod. She'd understood my coded request. She would help. Back in my cell, time crawled by in agonizing increments. Each hour stretched into eternity as I waited for word from Diane. Had she found anything? Could she access the records I needed? And most importantly, was she being careful? The last thing I wanted was for another innocent person to get hurt because of me. After 3 days of silence, James finally visited with news. "Your friend Diane dropped off some papers for me to review with you," he said once we were seated in the private conference room. "Said they were related to work matters you were handling before your arrest." My heart quickened. "Did you look at them?" He shook his head. "Attorney-client privilege extends to our communications. No one has examined them." From his briefcase, he withdrew a manila envelope and slid it across the table. With trembling fingers, I opened it, finding a stack of paper inside along with a small note in Diane's neat handwriting. "Found what you asked for. Be careful, I think someone's watching me. We'll keep digging. Stay strong. D." Beneath the note were printouts of financial records, transfers between accounts, dates, times, amounts. Most were highlighted in yellow, drawing attention to specific transactions that matched the alleged embezzlement. "What am I looking at here?" James asked, peering at the documents. "Evidence," I said, excitement building as I flipped through the pages. The embezzled funds were transferred between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. on various dates over the past 6 months. And I was never in the office during those hours. Never. But someone was. I showed him a page of after-hours access logs Diane had included. "Vincent Chen, our IT director. He has after-hours access for system maintenance. He was in the building during every single one of these transfers." James frowned, studying the logs. "That's circumstantial at best. His job requires him to be there after hours." "Yes, but look at the dates." I spread the papers across the table. The transfers always happened on nights when Vincent was supposedly performing system upgrades. He had the perfect cover to access the financial platforms without raising suspicion. "It's interesting," James admitted. "But not exonerating. He could argue he was just doing his job, and you were remotely accessing the system from home." Frustration clawed at me. There must be some way to prove it was him. "What about IP addresses?" "Every login is tracked. If that evidence exists, it would be in the company's security logs." James' expression turned grim. "Logs that I'm guessing your IT director controls." The realization hit me like ice water. Of course. Vincent had likely covered his tracks, ensuring that any suspicious activity appeared to come from my credentials. He was the perfect person to frame someone else. He had access to everything, could manipulate digital evidence, and understood the financial systems well enough to extract money without immediate detection. But why kill Melissa? And why frame me specifically? As I stared at the documents, a memory surfaced: Melissa, 3 weeks before her death, looking troubled as she worked late at her desk. "I think I found something odd in the transaction logs," she'd said when I asked what was wrong. "Probably just a system glitch. I'm going to ask Vincent to look into it." Had she inadvertently tipped off her future killer? Had Vincent realized Melissa was close to uncovering his scheme and decided to eliminate her while framing me for both crimes? But why me? What had I done to make Vincent target me specifically? And then another memory clicked into place: the company holiday party 6 months ago. Vincent, drunk on expensive scotch, asking me out. My gentle but firm rejection. His face, initially shocked, then hardening into something cold and unreadable. "You'll regret that," he'd muttered, walking away. I'd dismissed it as wounded pride. Now I wondered if it had been something far more sinister, the catalyst for a revenge plot that had resulted in Melissa's death and my incarceration. "I need concrete evidence linking Vincent to the murder," I told James, thoughts racing. "The embezzlement isn't enough, especially if he's covered his digital tracks." "What kind of evidence did you have in mind?" "The murder weapon was never found, right? The police report said it was likely a knife from Melissa's own kitchen, but it was missing from the scene." James nodded. "That's correct. What if it wasn't from her kitchen? What if Vincent brought it with him but took it when he left? If we could find that knife." "That's a big if, Cassandra. And even if such evidence exists, I don't have investigative authority. I can't search his home or office." I leaned forward, desperation fueling my determination. "But Diane might be able to find something at Westlake. Evidence connecting Vincent to the embezzlement or to Melissa. Something the police missed because they weren't looking at him as a suspect." James looked skeptical. "You're asking your friend to spy on a potential murderer. That's extremely dangerous." "She's already doing it," I said, tapping Diane's note. "She says someone's watching her. That has to be Vincent. He's worried she'll find something. All the more reason to keep her out of it. I can take this information to Detective Reeves, see if he'll investigate further." I shook my head vehemently. "Reeves won't reopen a case he thinks is solved. Not based on some access logs and my theory about a rejected advance. We need hard evidence." "And if your friend gets hurt looking for it?" The question cut deep, exposing the terrible choice before me. Risk Diane's safety to pursue the truth, or protect her and potentially spend the rest of my life in prison for a crime I didn't commit. "Tell her to be careful," I finally said. "Tell her not to take unnecessary risks. But also tell her to look into any properties Vincent might own besides his condo. Places he might have gone the night of the murder." James sighed, clearly unhappy with my decision but recognizing the desperation behind it. "I'll pass along the message. But I'm telling her to back off if she feels she's in any danger." I nodded, grateful for even this limited cooperation. "Thank you, James." As he gathered the documents to leave, a paralegal appeared at the door. "Mr. Whitfield? There's an urgent call for you at the front desk. Something about new evidence in the Morgan case." James and I exchanged startled glances. "Wait here," he instructed, following the paralegal out. Alone in the conference room, I felt a surge of dangerous hope. New evidence could mean salvation, or it could be the final nail in my coffin. When James returned 10 minutes later, his expression gave nothing away. "What is it?" I asked, hardly daring to breathe. The police found a burner phone in a dumpster 3 blocks from Melissa's apartment. It contains text messages allegedly between you and Melissa, arranging to meet the night of the murder. My blood turned to ice. That's not possible. I never texted Melissa that night. The prosecution believes differently. They're adding it to their evidence list. It's another plant. Vincent is setting me up. I stood, pacing the small room. Don't you see? He's still working to strengthen the case against me. Or someone disposed of evidence that's only now been discovered, James countered. Either way, it complicates our defense. We need to find out where that phone was purchased and who bought it. There must be surveillance footage. The DA's office is already working on that. But burner phones are notoriously difficult to trace. They're often paid for in cash specifically to avoid creating a trail. I sank back into my chair, deflated by this new setback. The walls were closing in, each new piece of evidence further cementing my guilt in the eyes of the law. What do we do now? I asked, hating the defeat in my voice. James hesitated, then reached into his pocket and handed me a folded note. This came with the documents from Diane. I didn't want to give it to you until I'd assessed the reliability of the information. I unfolded the paper, my hands shaking slightly. Vincent owns a cabin in the Cascade Mountains under his brother's name. County property records show he purchased it 6 months ago, right when the embezzlement began. Police never searched it because they don't know about it. I've found the address. Going to check it out tonight. We'll call James tomorrow with anything I find. Don't worry about me, I'll be careful. Terror gripped me as I read the last lines. Diane was planning to investigate Vincent's secret property, alone. When did she give you this? I demanded. This morning. But Cassandra, I've already called her multiple times. She's not answering. The implication hung heavy between us. Diane had gone to the cabin. And now she wasn't responding. You need to call the police, I insisted. Send them to that address right now. On what grounds? I can't tell them your friend is breaking into a property to look for evidence. That's illegal. Then make something up. Say you received an anonymous tip about the embezzlement. Say anything that will get them to that cabin. James ran a hand through his silver hair, clearly conflicted. Let me make some calls. I have a contact in a sheriff's department who might be willing to do a wellness check without too many questions. Hurry, I pleaded. If Vincent realizes what Diane is doing. I couldn't finish the thought. If my suspicions were correct, Vincent had already killed once to protect his secret. He wouldn't hesitate to do it again. And if anything happened to Diane because of me, I'd never forgive myself. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. No word from Diane. No updates from James beyond a terse message that his contact had agreed to check the cabin. I paced my cell until exhaustion forced me to stop, then lay on my bunk staring at the ceiling, playing out worst-case scenarios in my mind. What if Vincent had followed Diane to the cabin? What if she'd become his second victim? What if the police didn't take the tip seriously and never went to investigate? By the time James finally appeared the following afternoon, I was nearly frantic with worry. Tell me, I demanded as soon as we were alone in the conference room. James sat down heavily, his expression unreadable. The sheriff's deputy went to the cabin last night. Found signs of forced entry. Evidence of a struggle inside. My heart plummeted. Diane? No sign of her. But they found blood. He paused, his gaze steady. And they found a knife hidden under the floorboards. Initial testing shows it's likely the murder weapon used on Melissa Bennett. Hope and horror collided within me. The knife is evidence that Vincent is the killer. But Diane is missing, James confirmed. They've issued an APB for both her and Vincent Chen. He hasn't shown up at work or his condo since the cabin was discovered. I pressed my palms against my eyes, trying to process this information. The evidence I needed had been found, but at what cost? There's more, James continued. The cabin also contained financial records, detailed notes on the embezzlement scheme, including how to frame you using your personal information. Detective Reeves called me personally this morning. They're re-examining the case against you in light of this new evidence. Relief warred with worry. What about Diane? Are they searching for her? Every available officer in 3 counties is looking. They're treating it as a potential kidnapping. I looked up sharply. Kidnapping? Not murder? James's expression softened slightly. The blood evidence wasn't substantial enough to indicate a fatal injury. And Vincent's car is missing too. They believe he may have taken her with him. Why would he do that? Why not just, I couldn't bring myself to say the words. Leverage, possibly. If he's desperate enough, he might think having a hostage gives him some advantage. The thought of Diane in Vincent's hands made me physically ill. If he was capable of stabbing Melissa 17 times in a calculated rage, what would he do to someone who had actively worked to expose him? I need to get out of here, I said. Now that there's evidence exonerating me. I've already filed an emergency motion for your release, James assured me. We have a hearing in 2 hours. Given the circumstances, I believe the judge will grant it. 2 hours. After a week in jail for a crime I didn't commit, freedom was potentially just 2 hours away. But it would be a bittersweet freedom if Diane paid the ultimate price for my liberty. The judge granted my release with surprising speed. By early evening, I was walking out of the county jail, a free woman according to the law, but shackled by guilt and worry for Diane. James had arranged a hotel room. My apartment was still cordoned off as a tertiary crime scene linked to the mounting evidence against Vincent. The police will want to interview you again tomorrow, he explained as we drove. Given your connection to the case and your insights into Vincent's behavior. Now that you're a witness rather than a suspect, your cooperation could be crucial to finding Diane. I'll tell them everything I know, I promised. But I doubt it will be enough. Vincent is methodical, calculating. He won't be easy to find if he doesn't want to be. James parked outside the Westmont Hotel, turning to face me fully. Cassandra, I need your word that you'll leave the investigation to the professionals. No amateur sleuthing. No hunting for Vincent on your own. That would be incredibly dangerous, not to mention potentially damaging to the case against him. I nodded, the promise coming easily to my lips even as my mind rebelled against it. Of course. I understand. He studied me for a moment, clearly skeptical. I mean it. The police will find Diane. Your job now is to rebuild your life. After checking into the hotel, I stood under the shower for nearly an hour, trying to wash away the institutional smell of jail, the lingering trauma of wrongful imprisonment. But beneath the steaming water, my mind was elsewhere, calculating, connecting, planning. James was right about one thing: the police were better equipped to conduct a manhunt for Vincent. But they didn't know him the way I did. Didn't understand the cold, methodical intelligence that had allowed him to orchestrate such an elaborate frame job. Wrapped in the hotel bathrobe, I opened the laptop James had brought me from storage. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I logged into my personal email, searching for anything that might provide a clue to Vincent's whereabouts or Diane's fate. There, an email from Diane sent just hours before she'd gone to the cabin. Cassandra, if anything happens to me, check the encrypted file attached. Password is the name of that awful karaoke bar where we celebrated your promotion last year. I've found something big, something that explains everything. Be careful who you trust with this information. Some of it implicates people beyond Vincent. D. My hands trembled as I downloaded the attachment and entered the password, the crooning canary. The file opened, revealing dozens of documents, photographs, and financial records. I started scanning through them, my breath catching as connections formed. Vincent hadn't been working alone. The embezzlement scheme went far beyond him, extending to Robert Klein, our department head, and even Warren Westlake himself. They had been siphoning client funds for years, using increasingly sophisticated methods to conceal their activities. Until Melissa had noticed discrepancies in the accounts. Discrepancies that led back to Warren's personal ventures. A sickening realization dawned on me. Vincent hadn't killed Melissa and framed me because of a rejected advance. He'd done it on orders, to protect Warren Westlake and the corrupt empire he'd built. And I had been the perfect scapegoat, not just for the murder, but for the financial crimes as well. If convicted, all investigation into the embezzlement would have ended with me. But Diane had discovered the truth. And now she was paying the price for that discovery. Among the files was a spreadsheet with addresses, properties owned by various shell companies linked to Warren Westlake. Safe houses, essentially, where company executives could hide assets or, potentially, people. One entry was highlighted, a converted warehouse in an industrial district outside the city. Diane had added a note, Vincent seen entering 3X this week. Stays for hours. Could be where money is stored. Checking the cabin first, then here if nothing found. My blood ran cold. If Diane had told Vincent she was going to the cabin, he might have let her go there, knowing it was a trap, while hiding the most damning evidence at the warehouse. Or worse, planning to take her there after catching her at the cabin. I reached for the hotel phone, ready to call James or the police with this new information. But doubt stayed my hand. Warren Westlake was one of the wealthiest, most connected men in the city. If he was truly behind all this, how deep did his influence go? Could I trust that the police weren't already compromised? That my information would reach the right people? Diane's warning echoed in my mind. Be careful who you trust. I put down the phone. Some risks had to be taken alone. Quickly dressing in the clean clothes James had brought, I grabbed my purse and the hotel key card. The warehouse was about 15 miles away, in an area largely deserted at night. If Vincent had taken Diane there, time was critical. In the hotel lobby, I approached the front desk clerk. I need a taxi, please. Immediately. While waiting, I sent an email to James with Diane's encrypted file attached and a brief message. If you don't hear from me by morning, send this to Detective Reeves and the FBI. Vincent isn't working alone. Warren Westlake is involved. I've gone to find Diane. I included the warehouse address, then hit send just as the taxi pulled up outside. Where to, ma'am? The driver asked as I slid into the back seat. I handed him a slip of paper with the address. It's an unusual destination, I explained. But I'm meeting someone important there. As the taxi pulled away from the hotel, I closed my eyes, mentally preparing for what lay ahead. I was potentially driving straight into the arms of a killer, or worse, a group of killers who had already demonstrated they would do anything to protect their secret. But Diane had risked everything to clear my name. I wouldn't abandon her now. Even if it meant putting my newly regained freedom on the line. The warehouse loomed against the night sky, a hulking silhouette surrounded by empty parking lots and shuttered businesses. I paid the taxi driver extra to wait around the corner, in case my meeting runs short. He looked doubtful but agreed when I showed him two $50 bills. Alone now, I approached the building cautiously, staying in the shadows. A single light burned inside, visible through a high window. More importantly, a dark SUV was parked beside a side entrance, the same model Vincent drove, according to the police reports Diane had obtained. My heart hammered against my ribs. He was here. Possibly with Diane. Possibly with others from Westlake. And what was my plan exactly? I had no weapon, no backup, no way to overpower even Vincent alone, let alone multiple people. But I did have one advantage: knowledge. Thanks to Diane's file, I understood the full scope of their scheme. If I could somehow record a confession, create evidence that implicated all the guilty parties. I pulled out my phone and opened the recording app, then slipped it into my jacket pocket with the microphone facing outward. It wasn't much, but it was something. The side door was locked, no surprise. But a fire escape led to the second floor, where several windows were slightly ajar to vent the old building. Climbing as quietly as possible, I reached the second level and peered through a dusty window. The warehouse interior was largely open, with a few partitioned areas on the main floor. From my vantage point, I could see most of the space below, including Vincent pacing back and forth in front of a chair where a figure sat, head slumped forward. Diane. Relief flooded me, she was alive. But for how long? Vincent's agitated movements suggested a man on edge, dangerous and unpredictable. I eased the window open wider, straining to hear their conversation. Told you what would happen if you kept digging, Vincent was saying, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Why couldn't you just leave it alone? Diane lifted her head, and my breath caught at the sight of blood matting her hair on one side. Despite her obvious injury, her voice was steady. Because an innocent woman is in jail for a murder you committed. Because Melissa deserved justice. Vincent laughed, a cold, hollow sound. Justice? There's no justice in this world, Diane. Just power and those smart enough to use it. Is that what Warren Westlake told you? When he ordered you to kill Melissa? Vincent stopped pacing. You have no idea what you're talking about. I have proof, Diane said. The transfers, the shell companies, the planning documents for the frame job. I sent it all to the FBI before I went to your cabin. Even from a distance, I could see Vincent pale. You're lying, he said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Am I? Check the news. It's probably breaking right now. Vincent pulled out his phone, fingers shaking as he typed. Whatever he saw made him curse violently. Warren said you were close to Cassandra, but he didn't think you'd risk your life for her, he ranted, resuming his pacing. This complicates everything. It's over, Vincent, Diane said. The police will be looking for you. For Warren. For everyone involved. It's not over until I say it's over. He raised his hand, revealing a gun I hadn't noticed before. I still have options. Leverage. My blood froze. He was going to kill her. Without thinking through the consequences, I banged on the window. Vincent. The police are on their way. Let her go. His head snapped up, eyes widening as he spotted me. For a moment, everything was still, Diane staring at me in horror, Vincent processing this new threat, me realizing I'd just sacrificed my only advantage. Then Vincent raised the gun toward me, and I ducked away from the window as a shot cracked through the night. Glass shattered. A scream, Diane's, echoed through the warehouse. And I was running, scrambling back toward the fire escape, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Another shot. This one punched through the metal railing beside me, sending sparks flying. I half climbed, half fell down the fire escape, landing hard on my ankle but pushing through the pain. The side door burst open. Vincent emerged, gun raised, scanning the darkness for me. I pressed myself against the shadow of a dumpster, praying he wouldn't see me, wouldn't hear my ragged breathing. "I know you're out here, Cassandra," he shouted. "You've been nothing but trouble since the day you rejected me. Should have fired you then, saved us all this mess." He moved past my hiding spot, toward the front of the building, giving me a precious opportunity. The side door stood ajar behind him. I had two choices: run for my life, or try to save Diane. Silently cursing my own foolishness, I slipped from behind the dumpster and through the open door, finding myself in a dimly lit corridor. At the end, a doorway opened into the main warehouse space where I'd seen Diane. I crept forward, listening for Vincent's return, praying for time I probably didn't have. The warehouse was eerily silent now. No sign of Diane in the chair where she'd been bound. "Diane?" I whispered, scanning the shadowy space. "Where are you?" A muffled sound came from behind a stack of crates. I moved toward it, finding Diane huddled there, hands still bound but somehow having freed herself from the chair. Blood matted her hair, but her eyes were alert, widening at the sight of me. "What are you doing here?" she hissed as I worked to untie her. "He'll kill you." "He'll have to catch me first," I replied, helping her to her feet. "Can you walk?" She nodded. "I think so. But Cassandra, Vincent isn't alone. Warren's coming. He called him right before you showed up." The news sent a chill down my spine. If Warren Westlake arrived, our chances of escape would plummet. "We need to go. Now." I guided her toward a back exit I'd spotted from the window. "There's a taxi waiting around the corner." We had almost reached the door when footsteps echoed behind us, Vincent, returning from his search outside. "Going somewhere, ladies?" We turned slowly to find him blocking our path, gun trained on us with steady hands. "Vincent," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "You don't have to do this. The police already know about the embezzlement, about Warren's involvement. Killing us won't change that." "Maybe not," he conceded. "But it might buy enough time for certain arrangements to be made, certain evidence to disappear." "Evidence like us," Diane said bitterly. Vincent's smile was cold. "Precisely. I always knew you were smart, Diane. Not smart enough to stay out of this, but smart nonetheless." A new voice echoed through the warehouse. "Vincent, what the hell is going on?" Warren Westlake emerged from the shadows, his imposing figure unmistakable even in the dim light. His eyes widened as he took in the scene, Vincent with his gun, Diane bleeding, me standing protectively beside her. "This is a mess," Warren hissed. "I told you to handle it cleanly." "I was handling it until she showed up," Vincent gestured toward me with the gun. "Well, handle it now," Warren ordered, his voice chillingly calm. "Both of them." I reached into my pocket, pressing the record button on my phone again, praying it was still capturing this exchange. "It won't work," I said, summoning courage from some reserve I didn't know I possessed. "The FBI has everything: the embezzlement records, the framing plan, everything Diane found. I sent it before coming here. Warren's face hardened. Then I have nothing to lose by eliminating 2 more problems. Just then, flashing lights illuminated the warehouse windows. Outside, a voice boomed through a megaphone. "This is the police. The building is surrounded. Come out with your hands up." The momentary distraction was all we needed. I shoved Diane toward the exit as Vincent and Warren turned toward the windows. The gun discharged, a deafening crack in the confined space, but the bullet went wide. We burst through the door into the night air, straight into a wall of police officers with weapons drawn. "Down! Get down!" they shouted. We dropped to the ground as officers rushed past us into the warehouse. More shots rang out, followed by shouting, then an eerie silence. Detective Reeves appeared, helping me to my feet. "James got your email," he explained. "Called it in immediately." As paramedics attended to Diane, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, the recording still running. "You're going to want to hear this," I told Reeves. "It's the confession you need." Justice, at last, had found its true target.